Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Friday Night Figma demonstration. This evening we're going to do a little work on creating a form, and I'll make one in a mobile device, so at the very end we can get an idea of what we're talking about, what we've gone over. And I'll also cover a little bit of overlays, which may be useful in your prototypes, of course, depending on what you're working on. And let's see here, as far as forms are concerned, what are forms? So forms collect input such as names, credit card numbers, so on and so forth. Basically anything that the user types in that will then go to the back end and check some sort of information or verify something or otherwise just be stored in a database. And its forms are made of different elements, sometimes called controls, and those can include radio buttons, checkboxes, fields, which are single line entities, and text areas, which are multi-line entities, as well as buttons, and of course other things like drop downs. And I went ahead and found on Google image search this image right here. I believe this is a e-commerce form of some sort. I forget exactly where I got this. I think it's from like WooCommerce or something along those lines. And if we look at this checkout form that we have here, it features many of the elements described over here in this portion. And so let's see, I'll zoom in a bit so we can see here in this area where the user can select what sort of payment method they want to go with. We have radio buttons, and so we have the checked property here, and we have an unchecked, and of course only one of these can be checked. Being a radio button in this form area here, you could only select one, so you couldn't select both cash on delivery and a credit card. And let's see, I was unable to quickly find an image that featured any checkboxes, but it's sort of the same idea as a radio button, and that multiple items could be selected. And we have just fields all over the place. So fields would include your first name, last name, company name, so on and so forth, all the way down here until we get to this area, which is the it says order notes, and that would be our text area because it's multi-line, and so you could continue typing in here for a while and it would just keep on adding a line break every time you hit the end of the predefined width here. And there's also a drop-down form, or a drop-down list right here, which of course there's this caret, and you would click that, and then a little box would appear here, and then you could select what country so as to complete the checkout form. And lastly, there's a button right here in black that says place order. And so this entire bit is the form. And as you can see, of course, it has many different elements, many different controls that make it work together and give the user all the options they might need in this scenario to perform the checkout process. So I will create a form, a very, very simple form, and I'll discuss some of the do's and don'ts when dealing with controls, and we can see what we come up with. So I'll begin by creating a new page. I will call this form example, and I will start with a new frame, a new container for all this. And so I'll press the F key. You could also just go up here to the frame icon, and it says frame on mouse over, so frame. And we'll use a iPhone 13 Pro Max. I like the, as I've stated before in some of my other streams, I'm sure, I appreciate the amount of real estate, the number of pixels I have to work with when selecting this frame. It definitely is taller than the other ones currently available in this version of Figma. And so we'll go ahead and start with an iPhone 13 Pro Max 1 frame. And let's see here, I'm not sure exactly the best way to begin this, but I suppose we could start with just designing it sort of top to bottom. And so let's say that this is a screen on an app where you could send feedback to the app developers or another user or something along those lines. And so I'll go ahead and begin with putting some text in the very top, some hero text to describe what we're doing here. or what the purpose of the screen is. And so I'll press T on my keyboard to bring up the type control, and you can also just click here to bring up text. Sorry, text, not type. And so I'll click, and let's say, oh, drop us a line, something along those. And we'll make that a bit bigger. Let's see here, 96. And of course, you'll notice I just jumped into the design process. I did not begin by setting up a layout grid, and I felt that, at least for the sake of this design, that wouldn't be totally necessary, because I'm just trying to give an idea of what this could look like. But of course, if this were going to be a screen that was part of a larger product, or not something that's standalone, then of course you would want to apply the layout grid that you've been using for the rest of your design, just to make sure that everything remains consistent. And so I'll say drop us a line, and I want so that's our headline. I want a bit of a subhead here, and let's bump that down to 24. Let's see what that gets us. And say will be right with you, something like that. And let's see here, I'll organize the text once I'm done with this. And let's see here. And then once I have these two bits of text, I have the headline and the subhead. The majority of this middle area here is where I will put my form stuff, and at the very bottom I'll have a button that says something along the lines of submit. And so bump that up just a bit here. I'll go ahead and I'm going to make my button first, just so I can put it at the bottom. That'll by having the submit button down here, that'll establish how much room I have to work with in the middle. And so that's a good constraint to work with. And let's see here, as far as buttons are concerned, and of course, if you already had a project going up until this point, you may have a button that allows, you may have a button component that you could just drop in. And so I don't, so I'll start by adding text that says submit. I'll go ahead and make that 2432. I can adjust that later. I'll make it 32. And let's see here. I will go ahead and make that a frame, and I will apply an auto layout by clicking over here at the auto layout on the design panel. And that gives it a fill, which is automatically turned off. And let's see, I'll go ahead and turn that on. But of course I don't want it to be pure white, so let's see here, we'll give it a nice blue color, something maybe, it doesn't matter too much, something maybe like that, close to maybe what my shirt looks like. And let's see here, I want the, I'm sure it won't go anywhere, but I want the text, all the child elements that are inside the auto layout frame, which is called frame 1, let's call that button. I want the child elements to be centered horizontally and vertically. Again, there's only one element, so controlling that on its own won't be that big of a deal, or won't present that much of an issue. However, might as well do it right the first time around. And let's see here, I want to scrub in a bit of padding. Let's make that 20 horizontal and something like that for my y-axis. Looking good so far. I'm going to go ahead and give it a corner radius of 8. And so that's what our submit button looks like so far. I'm not a super huge fan of the black typeface on the white, or on this blue color, so I'll select the text element. And what if I made that something like, maybe something like that. It's a bit too gray, actually. I'm trying my hardest not to belabor this. I know FA always generally looks good. And now that blue is a little, as far as accessibility is concerned, that's a little bit too difficult to read. So yeah, okay, I'm liking the way that's looking. And I do want that to be a little bit wider, and so I'll just go ahead and scrub in some additional padding, some horizontal padding, just to pad that out. Maybe make it 80, something like that. And I'll go ahead and center that, and I will, let's see here, I want to give it a drop shadow, and I probably won't mess with the parameters on the drop shadow that much. And so if you have your element selected, in this case the the auto layout frame, which is called button, I will click effects, and it automatically gives it a drop shadow. That's what I'm sure that can be changed from its default, but at least in my version of Figma, the default effect is a drop shadow. And that's what it looks like. That's not the worst thing in the world. And so again, make sure that that's nice and center. I want to bring that, let's see here, down a bit. And of course I'm holding shift and pressing up and down on my keyboard to move this down as I please. And I can see the guide in the middle. The thin red line is telling me that I am indeed exactly centered to the screen where I need to be. So something like that, that's not bad. And I'll move that up a bit. There's a little bit too much in the way of line height on this area right here, the very large hero text. So I might scrub that down to something something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. And of course I'll move that up just a skosh, something like that. Okay, very good. And at this point I'll begin to design the elements of the form, and I'll explain the reasoning why I did that. And let's see here. So we'll just make this a simple comment form. And for a comment form, we'll want to have the users, and this will go off the assumption that the app that this is being used in does not require any sort of login procedure. So I'll ask for a name, an email address, so we have an identifier, a way to get back in touch with the user if we want to, and then also the text area just for the comment itself. And so let's see here, I'll start off with the input field. And generally, for things like this, especially since I'll be repeating a few of these items, it would be best decision to make these components. However, this isn't going to be part of any larger product, so I'm just going to sort of copy and paste as I go. But remember, use components when you can. So I'll go ahead and add a rectangle here, and I'll make that, oh, yeah, that's not bad. So I'll center that, and I want to make it, let's see here, this is going to be just a single line, so it's going to be just a regular input field. So I will go ahead and make it about that tall. I want my fields, all my input areas to have a similar style. I want there to be consistency throughout where possible. So the button down here has corner radius of 8. I'll also go ahead and give this a corner radius of 8. The fill, that color's not gonna work for this particular design. And so I'll give it we could get rid of the fill, or we could give it a fill that matches the background color of the frame we have here. And I'm going to go ahead and change the frame color to FA. I will change the fill color of the input field to the same, and of course it basically disappears when it's not being selected or focused. And there is a reason that I gave it a fill value of the same color as the fill value of its parent, the iPhone 13 Pro Max frame, and that will become clear in a little bit. Of course, if I forgot to do that, it's something that I could change with ease at a later time. And so I do want to obviously show the area, and the way to do that without a fill, or with having a fill that's exactly the same color as the frame itself, would be to add a stroke, and by default it's just pure black with a stroke of 2 from the inside, which is fine. So I'll go ahead and make a stroke of 1 is the default, so I'll give it a stroke of 2, and let's see here. Okay, I'm going to select my elements. I don't want to use pure black for all of these, so let's say, yeah, I like that. That's a hex 313131, and so there we go. And of course, you could also make the stroke, say, the same color as your submit, and I might play around with that at the end to see how that looks. And so there's an input field right there, and of course we're going to give it a label. We'll say name, and I want this to be, let's see here, that's the same font size there, so I might play with that a little bit. Let's try 20. Okay, yeah, 20 is not bad. And I could, let's see here, I might want to add some placeholder text here, and if I did, it would look like let's just say your name. I'll make that a sort of a lighter gray color. I don't want to go too light, of course, and if this were, if this were going for production or part of a larger design, of course I would, before I started to design any of this, I would already know what my color palette looked like. I would have checked it against WebAIM, contrast. I would know what these ratios are, and of course I'm positive that this gray right here would not pass, even AA. So I'll sort of maybe make it just a little bit darker, and I want it to be. So this is font size 20 here, and this is font size 20 here on the control label, or the input field label. So I want to make the placeholder just a bit smaller, so we'll try 16, something like that. I'll go ahead and put that here, and I guess what we could do is we could do some auto layout there if we wanted to. Probably wouldn't make that big of a deal. And whoop. Yeah, something like that. All right, and let's see here. Now you'll notice that I added placeholder text as well as a label. And that's not the most popular way of going about doing things. Placeholder text is extremely popular, of course. However, having both of these, not one or the other, doesn't seem to be a tremendously popular way of doing things in a lot of your most cutting edge apps and whatnot. And the reason I did this is I've been reading a lot about accessibility and form inputs, and I had a discussion with a prototype my oldest friend is a very senior level UX UI and also back end front end developer for a let's just say very large genomics company, and so he works with doctors and developers all day. And in my prototype, a lot of my inputs look something similar to this, where I had the field and I had the placeholder text, but I didn't have a label for the control. I had no label for the input, and he said that that's one of his least favorite things to see when he's looking at various designs. For a variety of reasons, and one of the reasons, and I was embarrassed as this went over my head, and I didn't think about this, is it is an accessibility issue. That is to say, it's an accessibility issue to not have a label for your input, and so we would have gotten rid of that, and so where it looks just like this. And the reason is, for one, generally speaking, this is going to be, your placeholder text is going to be a bit smaller. Usually, not always, smaller font size, and it's also going to be a bit lighter. Lighter in the sense that the font color will be probably lighter than the label, as well as the the font color and the weight of the font. So it might be difficult to see. It might be difficult to make out exactly what you're looking at here, and indeed with some vision types, they might not, a user might not be able to see the placeholder text at all. And so that was definitely something to think about. And he also mentioned, or I read in a Smashing Magazine article earlier today, that by not having the label here, traditionally when when a user clicks here or clicks in the field to start writing their name or their credit card or activation key or whatever the case may be, the placeholder text is going to disappear once focus is given to the input field. And for any number of reasons, that might not be the wisest idea, because they might, the example that comes immediately is the user might say, oh, what was I supposed to put there again? Or, if for example, this was a date field where you needed to type in a date, and for whatever reason a picker wasn't being used, your placeholder text might be something like this, and so the user goes in to type a month, or they go to type a date in, and then they click here to start typing, and then once this text goes away, and this happens to me quite often actually, I'll start to type and I'll think, wait, what format was that? Was that day, month, year, month, day, year? Was year supposed to be like the last two digits? Was it supposed to be completely like every all four numbers? Like what was that supposed to be again? And so it creates additional work for the user when you don't have a label, and your placeholder text goes away, and so you're adding sort of cognitive load to the scenario of trying to deal or trying to use what should be a relatively simple action, that is to say, filling out a form. And so you definitely want to have a label. I'm at this, prior to my discussion with my UX developer friend, I was sort of not anti-label, but I am, whatever I was before doesn't matter, as I'm now very much pro-label. And one argument against that would be, well, if you have a very minimalist design, that might clash with what you're working on. And fair enough. However, I would say, consult your documentation and consult your devs and your stakeholders and whatnot. But I would say that reducing any avenue wherein the user might experience confusion, which could lead to frustration or anger with your product, the more you get rid of opportunities for that to happen, the better. Don't make don't make me think. Don't make the user think. Just make it as easy as possible, and find a way to integrate that with your design documentation, your style guide, whatever that looks like. I would strongly suggest having that available to make life easier on your user, so they'll continue to use your product. And so I'm going to re-add my label here, which is going to be name, and let's see here, 16. Yeah, 16 looks fine. So I'll put my name label here. Say your name. And so I don't have a problem having the placeholder text here. There are situations where that's just probably not the greatest idea. I'm still reading up exactly how this is handled in HTML and CSS with regard to screen readers, because I want to make sure this is presented completely correct to those users who rely on screen readers. And so the more I learn about that, my opinion may change about placeholder text, having it when you already have a label, because you want the label no matter what. But it may be, it may turn out after I do more research, and of course I have a book coming in that goes into accessibility and forms that'll arrive in about a week. So once I peruse that, I'll have a great understanding. So right now my thought process is this is probably fine, but it could turn out after I do more research that is what you're looking for. And to be seen, we'll figure out what that looks like in a future video, I'm sure. And so let's see here, 16. Go ahead and make that 18, and I might want to make that medium, maybe, as far as the weight is concerned, and I can sort of pretty this up in a little bit. And so I want to go ahead and copy that. I'll move that down there, and then if you are a really neat keyboard shortcut, if you're making multiple copies of an element or a group or whatever the case may be, once you've created the first, if you hold down, at least on a Mac keyboard, hold down Command and press D, it'll duplicate the selection. It'll also do your last action, which in this case was movement. And so I could just continue to hit Control D basically forever, but I do have clip content turned on as far as this frame's concerned, so it won't actually go on forever in a way that's meaningful for us to see. And let's see here, I'm going to make that a bit taller, of course, something like that. Okay, and then obviously I don't want all my inputs to be nothing but name, and so I'll say email address, and for placeholder it might be app user at, I don't know, yahoo.com, something like that. And let's see here, type your message here, and this would be message. And always make sure, this possibly goes without saying, but I don't want to assume on anyone. You'll of course want to make your labels relative to whatever input they need to put in. It needs to be very specific. So email address, there's no question about what information or what type of data needs to go in this input field. Message is a bit more open because not everyone's message is going to be the same, but it's specific enough to let the user know. Also, there's a visual identifier here that this is a text area and not a a one-line input field, and so they can continue to type as much as they want to, up to whatever limit is set here in this area, in this text area. And same with name. It's, you're only going to need a single line for the name, and it's okay if if you have a very unexpected input types, or for edge cases, if the user has a name that is of longer length than average name length, then it would just scroll over to the right. But that's fine. We're not altogether worried with overflow in this situation. And that doesn't look too bad right there. I'm still not in love with the line height or anything like that, so I'm going to edit that just a little bit. And of course you could punch this up however you felt was necessary. So I'll move that up to 1, move that up 10 pixels just to give it a little bit more white space between the elements, but still create the idea that all these are together, all of these belong together as a form unit. And might take that down just a bit, something like that. Again, it doesn't have to be pixel perfect, as this is just an example. And let's see here, we're left align, fine with that. Does that look better? No, I don't like the way that looks. It looks out of hierarchy. And so I'll keep that left, I'll keep that aligned where it was. And looking good so far. And it does look looks a little bit bland. And I'm going to make sure my selection colors, let's see, right, it looks like when you select your frame, you can see all of the colors used by all of the elements inside of it, all the child elements, and that is under the selection colors area here in the design panel. And let's see here, see all 5 colors. Let's see here, so this blue is the fill color for my button, that's fine. This gray is my placeholder text, that's okay, and then this extremely dark gray is the stroke, and the stroke and all my input fields in my text area here, as well as the label, the subhead, and the headline. And then I do have a stray, just pure black element, and I want to find out what that is, because I want this, whatever it is, to be 31, 31, 31. And I could just type in the hex value here and leave it at that, but I am curious as to exactly what element it is. So I will oh wow, 5 elements. Okay, so I could click this sort of, I guess, crosshair icon and select the 5 items that use that color. And it looks like, okay, yeah, it looks like I left a lot of this text just dead black or pure black, so I'll make that 31, 31, 31. And that already does look a little bit better. And I'll reselect. Everything is looking good. And of course, if this were part of a larger product, or project, hopefully I would be not just randomly assigning hex values to hex color values to different elements. I would have a library set up based on, in Figma, I guess that would be team colors, so I would know what those are ahead of time. So I could just click this button here, and these are the team colors I was using for my own product, or my own project, and I made them the default for all untitled documents such as this, and so they would appear here with their own names and whatnot. So I would choose here appropriately, and it would, instead of having the hex value, if I had this gray, it would say gray/dark, because that's the family and the type that I had set up. But I'm not going to overwrite my team project color values just for this, and so we'll just leave it as hex, and that should be fine. And so this is looking okay so far. It is a bit bland, and how bland the design is will be, the acceptability of a non-exciting UI will be acceptable depending on the scope of your project. I was working on a product that having an exciting user interface was not at all important, and that was very low in the list of things that are important, and so that was fine. This, however, let's say this is a more, not whimsical, but a more sort of exciting product, maybe something with a social aspect or something along those lines. And so we could jazz it up a little by possibly adding in a little bit of background flair, and we could do that very simply without too much effort. I will just throw some say fun shapes in the background, if shapes can be fun, I suppose. I'll throw some elements in the background. I'll give them a very light hex value, or possibly just throw a transparency on them, and we'll see what we can come up with. And let's see here, I'm going to rename my frames right quick. This is going to be text area, frame 2 is email addy, frame 1 is name, button is button, and I'm not worried about the rest of those because they are what they say on the tin. And let's see here. Yeah, I'm not a super huge fan of the way that Figma organizes your layers, and so I'm going to drag these so they all make sense together. So message is going to go right above the, let's see here, message is going to go above the text area. I'll group those, and that's going to be text area. You'll want to spend more time naming these properly on your product. I can assure you, name is going to go above name, and I put it above the auto layout area because that sort of represents what it looks like here in the canvas. Name, the name text element is indeed above the input field, so I'll sort of keep it like that. Name and name. I'll group that together. Call that name. Again, you'll want to do a much better job than I'm doing when naming all of your stuff together. And email with email addy group. And I'm on my keyboard. You could right click and go to group selection. At this point I just hit Command G whenever I want that, so it's a little bit faster. But Command G, there we go, and we'll go ahead and call that email addy. Again, name your things better than name your layer items better than I am. And so looking over here, I'm not left with a bunch. It's one of my pet peeves is looking in the layers area and seeing rectangle 451, ellipse 68, because these things, name conventions like that, they are not helpful. They don't tell you anything about the element. And if you get, when you're making a product and you have several screens on one page, and your layers panel becomes scrollable because you have so many elements, so many groups, frames, what have you, it becomes a chore to find what you're looking for looking at the layers panel alone. When your layers aren't named appropriately. And so, like I said, rectangle 362 doesn't mean anything. That's just the default name. But if you name that rectangle, image carousel component 2, you'll know where to look for that or what that is. And so it'll help you. You'll have to spend an additional second to name it, sure, but that's going to you'll see dividends the more you work with it, because you'll have less guesswork about figuring out what things mean in your layer names. And so more to the point, I was going to make this look a little bit more interesting. And so let's go ahead and start drawing some shapes. And let's see here. I'll use my polygon tool, and I'll click once to add. Okay, and we just have a triangle. That's completely fine. I'm going to hold down Option and drag, and hold Option and Shift and drag that down. Shift so it stays in the same axis. And let's see here, drag that down. And there's a handle here. This is very cool. If you've laid down a polygon shape and you see this handle here, and you do a mouse over, it says count 3. You can click and hold, and you can move your mouse, and you'll see that it'll add faces to the polygon. And so we have a 5 gone here, and we have a 3 gone here. However you want to refer to these, a triangle, pentagon. And so let's draw some more. Maybe throw a star on there. Very cool. And star has the same count handle, and so we can make some fun shapes like that. You can make the, what is that, like the Mercedes-Benz logo right there. And so I'll get rid of that, but draw another one. We'll make one that looks like that. Maybe something like that. And then let's see here. I'll make another star, but I want to change. Whoop, there we go. And you can also change that over here in the count field under the design panel. And let's see here. Maybe something like that. And I'll go ahead and select all of these. And I would rename these, but I don't care enough. And anyway, I'm going to group them together in a way that this is going to make sense when one looks at the layers panel. And they're all sort of sharp. They lack a corner radius, and so I'll give them a corner radius, I'm just tapping up and down on my keyboard. Oh, I don't know, 6. That sounds fine. And so what I'll do here is, okay, and I notice that they're all hierarchically, they're all on top of, so to speak, the iPhone 13 Pro Max frame, and that is okay for now, and I'll show you why. And so I'm going to create duplicates when I'm drawing these because I might want to reuse them. So I'll draw this over here, take this over here, give that a rotate. I'll drag this over here, and when I'm dragging, I'm making sure not to put them inside of any element. Like I don't want them inside of this layout. And so what I suppose what I could do is, let's see here, I could select all of these and hide them if I wanted to, but that's fine for now. And let's see here, I'm going to move that there, just sort of rotate it a little bit. Let's move that there. We can move this. Let's see here, what haven't I used? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put another one of these maybe here, and lastly, move one of these down here. Okay, I'm going to group that and just call it, I don't know, shapes collection. I'll lock it and I'll hide it, and then I have all these shapes here. So I want to get all these shapes sort of in the same area, and let's select all of them. I'm going to, let's see here, Command G to group them together, and I will again just call that shapes. And please name your things better than I name them. And then let's see, I don't want these on top of any elements, so I'm going to drag them to the very bottom. And let's see here, we could give that, I'm going to find out what that blue color is, and then I'm going to drop the transparency way down. Let's 14%. Let's see what that looks like there. Okay, that's not the worst looking thing that I've ever made, I will tell you that. And let's see here, I'm going to select that, maybe move that a little bit off center, but something like that. Maybe just a little bit more to the right. Okay, there we go. And same with that. Something like that maybe. Yeah, anyway, you could, whatever your design dictates, you can play around with something like that, just create a little a fun background. And so I want to make that go down just a little bit more, maybe 12%, something like that. And I don't want to accidentally select this or move it around or anything like that, so I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer. And so right now, this is what our form looks like, and again, not the worst thing in the world. I'm designing this, so I'm freestyling. I'm shooting from the hip, and so having nothing to go off of. This is what I came up with, and it might be the case that these we'll see what these. I have the 31, 31, 31 hex value for the stroke, but it might be the case that they would look better as the blue. So we'll select that, and I'm not sure I like that, so I'm going to undo that. And let's see, I want a closer to reality view of what that might look like. So I will select the frame, and everything's named appropriately. Yeah, I'll select the frame. I'll do, you can hold down Shift E or Shift and tap E to go between, as you can see here on the right side panel, design and prototype. It shifts between the two. So I'll go to prototype, and let's see here, I'll show prototype settings. I want a background, I don't know, something like that. And okay, it knows what device, it chose this device for me, of course, because that's the frame size, or that's the frame type I'm using. Model graphite, I usually go with the silver or the gold, just because it gives more contrast between the background and the content. And so I guess it wouldn't matter that much, but I'll go ahead and select this frame. I'll click the play button, which will bring us to what our prototype looks like so far, and I can tell already that I definitely should have chosen a different background color. And of course, because it's bleeding right into the silver of the phone. And so I could change the phone color, or I could change the background color. And of course, you don't have to close the prototype window or the prototype tab every time you want to make a change to it. Instead, we can come back here, and this is our prototype information. I do not like that background. No, I don't. I'm going to go with a light blue, something like that. I will close it, and it updates automatically. And if for some reason it doesn't, or you change something and it's not being, it's not reflected here, you can just press the R key and it'll restart the entire prototype from whatever the first frame of the prototype is. However, in this document there's only one frame, and it's this one, so it's showing this one by default. And I want to make sure that, there we go, I believe that's 100%, I believe. And yeah, so that is what it's looking like so far. And I have a very clear CTA down here. That's to say my submit button, and I have the text area with with the placeholder text here on these two input fields. I have a label, so it's very incredibly clear what these are for, especially if you were to tap here and start typing in, or a user would tap here, start to enter their email address. This email address would disappear because it's a placeholder text, and there's still the label here, email address, so the user would know what this is for if they forgot or got up and had to walk away and came back and no longer knew what that input form is for. They would have that information immediately available. Now, one thing that I did not do on this that maybe I should have thought of doing, and that I suppose I could do, possibly, because I left myself plenty of room, plenty of white space, is let's say that you want to, and you will want to do this on projects and products that you create, is account for error handling. And let's say, for example, because you don't want to allow the user to submit a form or submit any data that doesn't conform to the data type that you're expecting or the data type that you're looking for, because then it might be completely worthless. And an example of what that might look like is if a user went to type in an email address, and instead of adhering to the typical email address convention of string @symbol URL or website name dot extension, they typed in something like appuser@gmail dot, and then just left it at that, and did not include the com or something like that. That would be unacceptable, and without any sort of error correction on the back end to detect that, that would that could go to your server or your database and be completely unusable. And so you may want to have or at least design for, and this, I guess this would be an example of a use case, inappropriate input or unexpected input. And so you could have so while the user is typing this in and they tab to the next field, or they go on to this text area here, you may have some text here that says, and I definitely wouldn't word it, ooh, that's not how you spell anything. Accepted input type user@domain.com, and let's do Shift E. Let's go to design here. Let's make that something closer to 12. Closer to 12, not 2, but 12. And because that is an error, you might want to give it like a red color like that, and something like that would appear to let the user know that that is an unacceptable input type, or what they put in that's not going to work. And I would definitely avoid phrasing it like this, because this is a strange way. A non-developer might not appreciate what you're trying to say here. But accepted input type user@domain.com. I definitely wouldn't phrase it that way, because that could imply several things to the user, like, are they expected to have a literal @domain.com? Domain is a web hosting company, so that is unlikely that you would have one of those unless you worked for domain.com. They might think, oh, does it have to be a .com, or any of these other questions that you cannot account for, or that, I guess, in a way that you would want to account for in such a way that you would word this to where it's very specific. And this is just an example of, make room on your design for corrections like these to appear if they need to. Depending on what the user puts in, it could just be Gmail space com or whatever the case may be. But that's definitely something you would want to keep in mind, is to have adequate space here to begin with, because if you go throughout your entire project and you create your form and you move on to the next screen and you did not, let's say that your project has numerous forms throughout and you neglect to make room for such error handling text, you would have to go back and correct many screens, and that might have a domino effect where editing the size or the white space between items here would affect any sort of elements above or below it, and so then you'd have to start correcting this and then correcting that, and just it would all flow out from there. So make affordances for yourself, because it would be easier, I suppose, in some situations it might be easier to tighten it up if you for whatever reason don't need it than to add it when you find out you do need it. And so yeah, I am not too angry at this design so far. It's not something that I would design on. Well, I did design it on my own. It's not something that I would, not exactly my style, but I think it works for whatever we're trying to. As an example, I think this works. It's again, I'm not a fan of this phrasing, but it's playful and it gives us an idea of what this could look like. And I went over some best practices regarding the inputs, placeholder text. Definitely want a label that needs to be very clear about what it's for. My CTA down here is, I imagine that's one of the, provided this wasn't below provided the user didn't have to scroll to see this, and I would design it in such a way that they didn't, because I want a very clear CTA on this page, because the eye would go here, or possibly here first, because the text is so large, but they would know what this was for, so my button's named appropriately, so on and so forth. And I thought that would, usually this would sort of be the end of the stream, but I was working last night on a prototype, and I guess I knew this function in Figma existed, but I never played around with it, or I never experimented with it. And when I did, it turned out to be, well, not useful for my prototype, but let's just say useful in general. It's a good thing to know about. And that is when you're dealing with prototypes, you can Figma. I don't know if this is new to the latest version of Figma. Maybe it's been out for a while. I'm not entirely sure. But there is the option to use an overlay, and I will design one, and I will show how that works and when you might want to use one. And so an overlay would be like anytime let's get out of this, go back to design. Anytime you click on an element or a frame or what have you, a box or a window would appear somewhere on the screen, and it would maybe blur out the rest of the screen, and it would say like, warning, are you sure you want to do this, or does this look okay on your Android device or your iPhone? Let's say you were deleting something of that iOS or Android thinks is important. It might say, whoa, are you sure you want to delete that? And that would come to the forefront. Nothing would be on top of it, and all of the elements behind the window would be grayed out or blurred out. And so that's what Figma calls overlays. And of course, each Material IO or Material Design calls that something specific. Human Interaction Guidelines calls that something else. But in Figma, that's just generally referred to as an overlay. Now, you certainly could design your own overlay. Let's see here, for example, or you could design an overlay pattern without using Figma's overlay functionality, and so I'm going to show what that would look like. So I duplicated my frame here, and at this point it would just make, okay, I wish they would not put what I duplicate on top of the layer that was duplicated. That is frustrating. Maybe that's a setting I can change. I want to call this overlay example, and let's just call this form screen. That'll work. And so what I want to do is create an interaction wherein the user taps or clicks the submit button, and we display an overlay on the page that's going to say, are you sure you want to send this message? Something along those lines. And so I will create my overlay. I'll just do it down here. I want to make it the same width as my input fields, my text area, and so I'll click here, or I'll tap here to find out what my width is. My width is 330, and so I'll press R, click, make a rectangle, type in 330. My height, I don't think I care that much, but we'll do it something like that. I want it to match what I have going on here so far as the UI patterning. So I will give it a corner radius of 8, give it a fill of FA. And yeah, quick pro tip, if you are using a hex value over and over and over and you're not adding it to a library for whatever reason, and you want to quickly assign it as a fill or a stroke or whatever the case may be, and depending on the, I'm not going to say simplicity of the hex, but if it's numbers that repeat themselves, like lately I've been a big fan of, not using pure white, of course, but I like FA, and so since FA is just FA repeated 3 times, if I just type in FA, enter, it auto-fills, it copies what I already have and puts it in as many times as it needs to complete the hex value. And so if I wanted to use, for example, pure black, instead of typing 000000, just type 0 once, enter, done. And so FA, done. I will select that. And let's see here. I'm not a huge fan of drop shadows in general, but I can see that I did put a drop shadow here on the button, so there is a precedent of using a drop shadow, and so I feel it's okay to use one. I will tap or click effects. It automatically has a drop shadow. Good enough for me. I could spend ages perfecting how the drop shadow looks, but that's fine. And so in this rectangle, let's see here, I will add some text here. I'll say, are you sure you want to send this? Again, come up with something more clever. And let's see here, let's make that 24. Whoop. Are you sure you want to send this message? Question mark. Let's do that. Something like that. And then I would have another button down here at the bottom that's, oop, that's not what I wanted at all. Let's do this. Duplicate, drag down here, move it to the forefront, and this will just say, good. Yes, there we go. Let's center everything and make sure everything looks good. Center that. Just tapping down with my keyboard, and this is a scenario where you want to use auto layout, but I'm not feeling like going through all those motions right now. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to make that into a frame of its own, because that's what I need to, that's the element type that I need to have to use it for prototyping. I guess not in this scenario, but I'll just go ahead and make it a frame anyway. And so you could do Option Command G to make it a frame, but I'll right click and say frame selection. I'm going to call this overlay. Let's call it modal, I suppose. I'm going to move it here. This is going to be the page. Center that. There we go. This is going to be the page that shows that has the modal on it. This is the not great way of doing it, or that's to say it's certainly a way of doing things. I'll go ahead and move that up a little bit. There we go. And so I do want, obviously that will be that can be difficult to see, and it can be easy to misunderstand what's going on here. If it just popped up, or if this, having clicked the submit button, if this just came up as it is and didn't do anything to the background frame, if it didn't blur it out or gray it out or anything like that. So with that in mind, I'll create a new frame. I'll press F, iPhone 13 Pro Max. Actually, I don't want to make that a frame. I'll make that a rectangle. I'm not overly worried about it. I'll drag it onto the overlay example frame, the parent, and let's see, I want to zoom in right quick, make sure I'm lined up. I am. I'll click and drag this to where it fills the entire frame, and let's say here, I want to make that pretty dark, 31, 31, 31, that's fine. And I will adjust the transparency, what is that, 60%? That's fine. And so I'll drag my overlay frame on top, so make sure okay, cool. And then it's centered in both directions here. And again, I know my spacing and my padding isn't wonderful on this, so you would want to use auto layout. And so let's make it to where, let's go to prototype, select the form screen, and I will click and drag the plus icon to, oop, not there, that's not what I want. I want it to be on click or on tap, so I will drag it there. And instant, I don't know. Let's just, yeah, in this case, I do want it to be instant. I don't want there to be any sort of move in or move out, because that won't make sense in this scenario. We want to fake an overlay just appearing, and if we use a different sort of animation like move in or slide in, or have any easing or anything like that, it's going to be odd looking. It's not going to make sense. And so let's see, I want to make sure this works, and I'm going to close that. I guess I didn't have to do that. I'm just used to it. I'll press the play button, and let's see what we have here. Boop. Okay. Yeah, so this works as expected, and that's how you would fake an overlay. I guess a lot of things are faked in prototyping. That's not a fair verb to use, but that's one method of creating an overlay in Figma. And so you have your message here, or the user, types all their information in, name, email address, the actual content of their message. Tap submit. Are you sure you want to send this message? And of course you would want to have an option here that says no, or an X that says cancel, because as it stands it looks like yes is your only option, so why did I even bother to ask? So you would have two buttons here, yes, no, cancel, whatever the case may be. And so, but yeah, that's sort of the end of this prototype, but that's how to create, that's one method of creating an overlay. But as I said earlier, there is an easier way to do this. And so let's see here, I'm just going to move that a little bit over to the right. And the easier way of doing this, that actually gives us a little bit more control, is to create just the overlay message, which in this case is this rectangle right here with the copy and the button. Just to create that, and then make it a frame and prototype, have a link from the submit button to that of type, I guess, display overlay or show overlay, whatever Figma says. And I will show you how to do that. So I'm going to copy the overlay. I'll put it, sure, somewhat in the middle. And are you sure you want to send this message? This just, whoops, there we go. This just looks kind of silly. And so I'm going to actually fix it to what it should look like. We will, let's see here. Oh, yeah, that is auto layout, so I don't have to worry about it. And then let's say, I don't know. Hey, that's not bad at all. Okay, yeah, we'll leave it like that. Let's correct the height on there. Again, make something that looks better than this. Shouldn't be that hard. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not completely worried about getting that. Oh, it is right. Okay, very good. So we'll zoom out a little bit here. And what I am... There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. And so I'm not worried about exactly about how this looks. So one functionality that creating an overlay like this does not offer us is the ability to tap outside of this overlay, of this modal, which is an implicit no or cancel. However, using Figma's overlay capabilities, that's baked in. That is an option that we have, which is very cool, and I didn't expect it, but they added that, which I thought was just fantastic. And so this is the overlay in and of itself. And so I didn't, that's kind of driving me nuts. Whoop. There we go. Overlay button. No, there we go. My layers are going nuts over here, and that's not that big of a deal for the sake of the example. Just do better than I'm doing, because I'm just sort of freestyling as I go here. And so this is the first way of doing it, and again, it's not giving us all the control in the world. So I would probably avoid doing it that way. There we go. And so another way of doing it, I don't want to say it's better because I don't want to impugn anyone's design skills or any designer who chose not to do it this way for whatever reason, or for that matter, I don't want to, again, impugn anyone who possibly designed an overlay in a previous edition of Figma that didn't have this feature, or maybe it's always had this feature, I just don't know because I haven't been using it for more than 6 months. But we will select the action, the CTA in this case is this button that says submit. Hold down Shift, press E, gets into the prototype features, and it brings up, of course, the prototype layer over here. And let's see here, I'm going to get rid of that because I don't want it linked to multiple things here. I'm going to click and drag from the submit button to the overlay, which works because it's a frame. And interaction details. So on tap, yeah, that's fine. We're not going to navigate anywhere. We're going to open overlay, which changes the where it connects to. Instead of having this arrow drawn just to the midpoint of this overlay frame, it draws it to the very top right, and it has an icon right here, which in and of itself, sort of standalone. It's not exactly clear what this means, but and I can't zoom in on it because if I zoom in, it just it stays the same size. But I'm supposing this is meant to be an overlay sliding in on a frame. It's difficult to determine exactly what they were going with there, but I imagine creating icons for actions such as these is not the easiest thing in the world. In any event, interaction details. So we have on tap. That's the action type, and then we want to open an overlay, and it says open overlay, and then it says overlay. That's only because that's the name of the frame, and so we can call this, I don't know, we'll rename this frame OK to send, and now we'll say open overlay OK to send because that is the name of the overlay. It wants to open the overlay called, in this case, OK to send. And it doesn't know what an overlay is. It's going to give you all of your different frames that you have available in the document here. And so it's also giving me the option to select overlay example, which is the one that we created right here. That won't work for a number of reasons. The first and foremost being is exactly the same dimension as this one, so it would just look like it was, instantaneously going to a new screen. So that's not going to work. And so we're going to select OK to send. So when we click the submit button, it's going to bring up this as an overlay, which is how I designed it, all small, or not all small like this, but in this dimension. And it's called OK to send. OK send overlay centered. And it gives us a couple of options about where we want the overlay to appear when it sort of pops up on this frame. And I've been using centered so far. However, an example of when you might not want to use centered and possibly use top left or any of these others, bottom left, you have many options here, including manual, which allows you to sort of it'll show a ghost of where it would be, and you would put this exactly where you want it. Like if you didn't want it exactly in the middle, you could have it up a little bit, or maybe off to whatever your design dictates. It would put it wherever you wanted it to put it, and you have this. I'm not sure what to call this right here. You have this frame with the X going through it, and you would place that wherever you wanted to when this is set on manual. But centered is good for this example, and overlay, you could also, I've seen some examples where this functionality is used in a prototype to show an opening of or the sliding in of a drawer of controls on the left side. And so, or you could do maybe some sort of, you could not fake, but you could simulate what a hamburger menu would look like on tap. By bringing up an overlay in a very specific area underneath the hamburger menu. And as a side note, I would try to not design around a hamburger menu, even though we've been using them for so long. It is a design fallacy that people know what this is. We've been using it for so long. We'll know. No, they don't. Don't assume anything of your users. And I think the hamburger menu was a good idea. I'm not sure if it's ever been 100% properly integrated into anything. But that's a question to ask Facebook. I think one of their developers created the hamburger menu. I could be completely wrong about that, but I'm sure millions of dollars went into those 3 lines, and lots of testing. In any event, I'm not here to wax poetic on the use of the hamburger menu in UI UX. Some more of the options we have here: overlay centered on top of the screen. That is on top of the frame. That's the one in question, or the one we're designing on. That sounds good. 2 very important options we have here. The first one being close when clicking outside, and that is it does what it says on the tin. And this, when the user taps or clicks outside of the area, anywhere around here that's not on the overlay, it'll close the overlay, that's how it's going to work on most devices. So it's nice that Figma added that functionality into this prototype interaction. And there's also an option here: add background behind overlay. And this. Let me move this over here. Yeah. So that simulates that simulates the effect that I created over here with the rectangle that has the dimension of the frame itself that I made gray and put like a 50% transparency on. This will simulate that without some of the work. And it doesn't have to be gray. Of course, it gives you a color picker here if you click this, I guess, icon right here. And so you could change this to whatever you want. And then the 25% here, of course, refers to the transparency, but I'm going to keep it nice and simple and make it, almost got it, 31, 50. That's fine. That's in line with what we've been using so far. And let's see here, and of course you can have that be instant to instantly appear, or of course you can do a dissolve, do a move in. You can see that a lot of these aren't options, and it seems almost, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I feel kind of rude when I think to myself, well, it was nice that they gave us an option to control the color, control the transparency, the opacity. Boy, I wish they gave us the option to have it be a layer blur effect instead. And I'm thinking, well, I'm using this software for free, and they were nice enough to add this feature, so I should probably not complain about such things. But we'll set that to hex value 31, 31, 31, give it a transparency of 50%, and all of these other options look good. So I will show you what that looks like, and I will select the form screen frame, and I see that everything is connected here. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click play, and we'll see what this looks like in the prototype. Okay, yeah, everything's looking good so far, and I will tap submit, and there we go. There's my overlay. And because of the options we had, the checkbox options, we were able to change the color of the background here, which it adds the fill background to the entire frame, which we chose was hex value 31, 31, 31, transparency of 50%. And if I tap outside of the overlay, it goes away. Very cool. And so there's many different ways you can integrate that. And of course you can make overlays on top of overlays on top of overlays. For example, if you wanted to, let's see here, you could, and I'm in the prototyping mode here, you could drag, if you wanted yes and no in your prototype, if you wanted these to have specific actions, like if your prototype went deeper than this, you could drag no to another overlay that would ask other questions, and you could have overlays on top of overlays. Don't go crazy with it. Of course, you want to keep it nice and simple, but you could go beyond what I did here. And like I said, there's many use cases for the overlay functionality in prototype. I mean, drawers that come from the left. We could have slide up drawers from the top or the bottom. You could simulate a hamburger menu. If you do so judiciously, would be my advice to you. And you could position this overlay wherever you wanted to I was using center because I like the way it looks and I think it's appropriate for what I'm doing here. But of course, depending on how large your page is, how much scrolling you have going on, that may not be appropriate. But that is how to use the overlay. And that about does it for this stream. I went over some of the basics of input and form creation, some of the best practices, riffed on placeholder text, why it may or may not be a good idea. However, I'm continuing to learn about it, and the questions about accessibility, whether placeholder text is good or bad. It should never be used on its own, that is to say, as a replacement for the label, and for that matter, just include a label. Please include a label. That's going to go so far in making your form look more professional and indeed more accessible, because screen readers are going to have will have a difficult time sometimes, depending on what the markup, the CSS and the HTML and possibly the JavaScript look like on the back end. Might have a difficult time explaining to the user who's using the screen reader what exactly these input fields are for. And so, yeah, that's an example of how to go about doing forms and how to have fun with overlays. Two different ways of doing it. I would suggest doing this style because it would save you time, provided this style over here, wherein you duplicate the same screen, add a rectangle. There might be a scenario where that would be better for you, because I believe, let's say, for example, if you wanted this rectangle to instead have an effect of, let's say here, layer blur, something like that, that might be way more, perhaps something like that is what you're looking for, which almost has a gradient-like feel to it. Or if you wanted a gradient, or well, I guess you could do a gradient through the other way, but in any event, there are some situations where this would be appropriate. However, I would consider, what it is you're doing, and possibly play around with the overlay feature that's already present in Figma, because that might be a quicker way of doing things. But in any event, that is it for this evening's stream. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns about what I've done tonight, or if you have any suggestions about future streams, I try to do it at least twice a week. There's no set schedule yet. I can be reached on the Springboard Slack. You know where to find me there. And of course, I am on Twitch. You could subscribe to me and sign up for the notifications so you will be alerted when I go live. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend, and I will catch you next time.